Good evening and welcome to the Data Pubcast episode 1. My name's Nick Latosha and my co-host is Andy Crossley. And this is a brand new podcast. And we thought the best way to kick this off would be to have a chat about ourselves over a beer so you can get to know us. So let's kick off and cue the awkward silence where no one knows who goes first in these introductions.
I think I'll probably pick up from there, I guess, Nick. Good intro. We are set in a virtual pub. Unfortunately, well, we're keeping some social distancing, I think, at the moment. We're sat here enjoying a virtual beer to chat all things data and introduce you to our Data Podcast. We are trying to do things a little bit differently, and we're going to tell you a bit about what we've got lined up and what this is all about. But as Nick said, we are here together. We've met through various forums over the last couple of years and thought we'd get this idea off the ground after much talking about it. So I guess as a first intro, episode, we are trying to bring something slightly different to the vastly growing market of podcasts, hence the name of podcast. And we're trying to make this a little bit more informal, I guess. Nick, is that fair?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So want to move away from the kind of formal interview style podcasts and try and make it more like we're having a chat down the pub and trying to find out a bit more about various guests that we've got lined up over the coming months.
Yeah, and I guess as you would chat with your mates, making it much more chatty. Hopefully not getting too drunk with virtual beers, but there's a lot of chat out there about data. Data, for me anyway, has risen to prominence, I think, in everybody's life because of things that have been on the news for the last 6 months or so. And everybody's talking about it. Everybody seems to be involved in data these days. And what we're trying to do is get to the heart of some really, I guess, gritty problems that people have solved, or the real world warts and all stories. My feeling is you often only ever see the stuff that comes through the marketing department rather than the real world version of some of that. And so it's a bit of an overused word with all the podcasts and podcasts, but something that's a bit more authentic and something that's about everybody's out there learning a lot of this. I don't believe that anybody knows it all, and that's what we're here to try and learn ourselves. Really, we both come from quite different backgrounds, don't we, Nick? So I think we're approaching it slightly differently.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing that we kind of learned from the NDF and MankDB was everyone's having the same problems. They're just in different stages of those problems. So as you kind of said, it's good to be able to really get into the detail of those and go past the glossy PR spins and marketing and find out what it's really like to be a data leader, run data programs and all that kind of stuff. So
good. But I guess before we sort of jump into a bit more about what we're looking forward to, what we've got lined up, talking about what we're trying to get out of this podcast. Tell us a bit about you. What's your background? Where do you come from? What's particularly on your plate at the moment?
So I never kind of planned to get into data, and I don't think most people did. So I started off working for Royal Bank of Scotland many years ago, and fell into some data projects around migrating trades and migrating databases and data sets, and that's where the kind of spark and the passion for data kind of really started, and then went down probably a more traditional route of self teaching myself how to become a BI developer, typical Microsoft SQL Server stack, and really getting into the kind of technical nitty gritty of building out a data warehouse and a BI platform.
Yeah.
But then I kind of started to notice that there's a lot more to be kind of driven out of data than just data warehousing and reporting. So that really got me into the more strategy side of things, and
Mm-hmm.
then moved on to more of a kind of a managerial role, and that's when you really start to understand how businesses are run and how they can start to use data to drive value back into the business.
Cool.
So yeah, moved on to travel counsellors. Whereas head of data for the past 4 years, and that's when I started to put some of those things into practice, and um, you know, sitting with directors and CEOs and trying to understand their business problems and their business goals,
Yeah.
and translating those into data solutions or data programs of work is what I really started to enjoy, and that's where my kind of career is heading now. Um, so COVID then kind of meant that travel was not doing too well, and I moved on to CHEP, where I'm 3 months in. I've still not been into an office. I've still not met my boss or any colleagues.
Wow.
But yeah, getting stuff done in a virtual way, and yeah, just carrying on banging that data drum and pushing the data strategy.
Good. And do you, these days, do you still try and get your hands into the tech where you can?
Yeah, I think it's important, for me anyway, to have that appreciation of the technical side, so that you can talk on a level playing field with your team, with the people that you're working with, and also with IT as well,
Yeah.
because I think if you don't have that ability to talk at both the technical level and also a corporate or a business level, then you're not translating those problems efficiently,
Yeah.
and you don't have a full appreciation for what your team is doing or building. So yeah, I like to keep up to date, but there's just so much going on at the moment.
Yeah, one of my team told me that the average half life of their technical knowledge is 18 months, but rapidly coming down. So yeah, keeping on top of this stuff is no mean feat at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. There's so many new platforms and vendors and technologies, especially when you get into kind of data science and machine learning.
Mm.
I was having a similar discussion with one of my old team members, and they said it's a full-time job on top of a full-time job, kind of
Yes.
keeping up to date with data science
Yeah.
alone. So it can be quite challenging.
Yes.
But I think as a data leader, you need to know the basics, and you need to kind of keep up to date in that sense, not
Yeah.
necessarily the lower level details of how all these things work.
Agreed. Yes. I think general themes is what I try and stick to at the moment. In some attempt to keep on track of what's going on out there.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's quite a different route into all of this space than I've taken. Much less technical, but I've largely worked in small, sort of not quite boutique, but small specialist consultancies for most of my career, and either working for myself or a small team. But
Hmm.
I found myself in an organisation that has a very long heritage in sort of operational improvement, uh, probably use data in one shape or another for most of that history, just not with technical skills. So, uh, I'm cartooning it, it's like the brown paper and post-it note consultancy um, world, but in terms of solving complex operational problems, it was largely data driven. It was just using Excel
Hmm.
for our sins. So yeah, the world has moved on. We've now got a dedicated team, and I operate in the sort of leader space for our business, which is Oakland Group, and lead an extremely talented group of data engineers, data scientists, quite a few full stack engineers as well. And that's one of the things I've learned in terms of, I guess, the difference between a purist data scientist in my mind and a full stack data engineer. And yeah, the latter has become ever more important in this day and age, rather than a purist data scientist that can do the modeling piece.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we come at things from a slightly different angle, but I think we're both driven by the same interest in the space and the same desire to drive improvement. I think, and that's exciting for me is just the possibilities of what you can do is vast in my view. What is more interesting is I still think there's so many businesses out there who have just not tapped into the potential of their data.
Yeah.
And I think, coming back to what both of us want to move away from the PR glossy version of the case studies, it's also moving away from the glossy versions of what's possible, because I think there is a big imagination gap for a lot of organizations where, I don't know about you, Nick, but I find can have conversations where people seemingly get AI and driverless cars and all that cool stuff, and yet are stuck on, well, how do I just get off our Excel spreadsheet?
Yeah.
And there's a chasm between the two, and then you've sort of got to get them started. So hopefully through some of this and through some of our guests, we can hear about actually how people do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of our first Northern Data Forum in Manchester was around the hype around AI, and that was really interesting to get one of your data scientists to talk about one of the projects that he was working on and the problems that he came across.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. Some of these big engineering companies that we work with, they've all got the same problems or same challenges, which in one way makes them feel better about themselves. You can imagine, it doesn't make it any less challenging to solve. But that's why I've got a team of very clever people. So cool. I guess what we've got a number of guests lined up. We can't say too much about them as yet, but they all come from quite different backgrounds, different companies, different skill sets, different industries. Are there any particular areas or any of those guests, without naming them yet, but that you're particularly looking forward to or wanting to hear the story from?
Yeah, good question. I think I'm interested in hearing about uh, guests from startups who have had the opportunity to do things the right way from scratch. A lot of the time we talk to people who have done legacy transformations or on-prem to cloud migrations and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you never quite get to do things the way that you want to do them because of legacy processes or legacy tech. So it'd be really interesting to hear from people who have that clean slate and are able to go in and transform the technology and the business in the way that they want to in almost a textbook sense. So I think that would be interesting. And I think touching on our kind of introductions, it's always good to hear about how people have got to where they are now. So
yes,
as you said, we've got two different backgrounds, but I think we kind of come at it from different angles, but we end up in the same place. It's almost that that translator between the business and the technology.
Yes.
So it'd be good to hear how people have got there, and everyone's story is different. So I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, and it's funny you say about people who have managed to start something with a clean slate. I'd be interested in those that have got then that far, having started from a greenfield, and actually even now they roll back and do it any differently. We do a lot of work, and I have through my career with sort of bigger enterprises and organisations, and they've always got of course I'd do it differently if I started again, because they've got so many moving parts. already
Yeah.
there that they've got to navigate around. So yeah, I'd be interested to see whether those who have gone, well, God blank sheet of paper, I can do what I want. Would you do it differently if you went
Hmm.
that journey again? Um, I'm particularly interested in those bigger organisations that have done what I would call genuine transformation with data. So
Yeah.
um, I believe I see very little examples of proper end-to-end sort of, I guess, value chain or life cycle change from the use of data. I still believe what we see on LinkedIn and PR and media and all this are still relatively narrow or discrete examples of the use of
Hmm.
analytics data or whatever you want to call it. I'd love to see something that has transformed a process end to end.
Yeah.
And if you're getting into the bigger enterprises, that can often be quite a big process if you think like supply chain or something like that. And that's the bit that genuinely interests me because I think if you can get that right, that is where you get transformational change because it's affecting everybody that interacts with that process, how you run the process, and what comes out of it. And I
Yeah.
think there are some good examples out there. They're just often not talked about in the same way. I think so. For me, it's probably slightly the less sexy end of data, but given the world I work in at the moment, hearing how people have gone about changing that, because I think that's where you move into things like data literacy, data governance. It's all well and good giving 100, 200, 300 people a brand new dashboard, but if nobody tells them how to use it and what decision they're going to make off the back of it, you haven't really changed anything. So
Yeah.
um, so yeah, there's some really. I'd love to tap into some case studies and I guess the experience people have had of trying to do that as well. Because I'm pretty sure it's not a straight line.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. It's about the experience and what people have learned and the challenges that they came across and
Mm,
the things that went wrong and all that kind of stuff, rather than just the process, because that's where kind of people learn and that's
yeah,
where the real interesting stuff lies.
yeah. I guess from a personal point of view, from my out of work life, sort of interest in sports and cycling particularly. Um, I'm quite intrigued to find, and this is a bit of a plug to people out there, if anybody knows anybody in the world of cycling that has used data, everybody's heard of sort of marginal gains that Team Sky did back in the early noughties. But it's stuff like that that interests me as well. In everyday life, how are people using data? That supports like your hobbies and your interests outside of the work world. And I don't mean sort of algorithms in Facebook and stuff like that, but genuine sort of improvements in the things that you use. If
Hmm.
you see what I mean? I think that would be quite fascinating because that sort of brings it to life in a different way for me as well.
Yeah, and I guess because pretty much data powers most of the things that we do, whether we know about it or not.
Yeah.
So it's kind of uncovering the things that you just don't know about that are changing the way we do things or the way we live. So yeah, that would be interesting, and I think um, they're the real hard ones to find. So
Mm.
if anyone does know
Yes.
of anyone, let's chat. I think.
Yes. Anybody from the Armstrong era of the Tour de France would be quite interested to talk to you, but we might not have the legal setup to talk about that at the moment. So, yeah, cool. So, just one final area for me, and more to give our listeners a sense of what interests us. Are there any in the coming months, and looking as far ahead as you dare? Are there any, I guess, trends or areas that are particularly interesting you or exciting you on the horizon that you would love to hear about people using or sort of getting product owners in to talk about?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I think the whole cloud data warehouse space has been kind of transformed in the past few years.
Yeah.
Um, and there's still more kind of platforms being developed and vendors appearing. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about keeping up to date with all of this
Mm.
change in technology. So yeah, really interested in that side of things
Mm-hmm.
from a technology point of view. Um, I think I'm also interested in what people think around the role of the data scientist,
Yeah.
and whether that role in itself is going to become more specialized, and whether we'll start to see the title data scientist disappear and
Mm-hmm.
more kind of specialized titles start to appear. Um,
Yeah.
and I
Interesting.
guess this comes from trying to hire data scientists over the past few years and realizing that you just get a massive array of backgrounds and specialisms, but they all
Yes.
just fall under this one banner of I'm a data scientist. And
Yeah.
um, I'm sure that
Completely agree.
that needs to change, both for people like me looking for data scientists, but data scientists looking for jobs that they're actually interested in. So
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be interesting. We should. You made me think now. We should get a recruiter on and get their perspective on that because well, there's recruiters and there's recruiters, but I suspect they sort of fall foul of the same challenge in that when you ask for a data scientist, you need to be a bit more specific.
yeah.
So yeah, I knew I shouldn't have asked you that question first because you've just taken both of my answers. So now I've got to think of another one. But the data warehousing cloud space, whilst I'm not technical, um, it fascinates me in the sense of well, two reasons, and this is the non-technical view of it. But everybody talks about cloud migration, especially at the moment with people working remotely and all the rest of it. And that is obviously much broader than just your data. That's just
Mhm.
that's everything from I don't know, using email to applications. Obviously, from our world, the data space is even more fascinating, and you see, data lake, data warehouse. Databricks have brought out things like Delta Lake, which is supposedly a combination of the two, using the best of
Mhm.
both worlds. All of this sort of proliferation of cloud capability and cloud technology to enhance or improve or ease your use of data and that storage, compute, everything. Um, the area is vast, and this is the skeptic in me. I just wonder whether a lot of it is again the PR machine of calling the same thing a different name.
Yeah.
Um, so I'd love to understand and hear a bit from everybody, from the people who use it to the people who sell it, and vendors talking about well, what's the differences between them and why, which would be quite interesting.
Mhm.
The skill thing, yeah, you're going to say about the cloud stuff.
Yeah, it reminds me of when I was working at a previous company, and there was quite a popular BI tool that always used to market to our finance people,
Mm-hmm.
and they used to think that this was the best tool since sliced bread,
Yeah,
because of they would demonstrate it taking this data and doing magical things with it.
yeah,
And it's the same kind of thing, but they've used the perfectly clean data, and
yeah, yeah,
they've done it in a really controlled way, so the outputs look really fantastic.
yeah,
And it's understanding the difference between that hype and that that kind of marketing message,
yeah,
and actually what can this do for me that's better than what I'm doing already, or better from other tools on the market.
yeah.
Um,
Agreed.
and it's that, and it used to really kind of get to me because it's dangerous trying to get that message over to people when they don't fully understand it.
Yeah, yes. I think you're right. And again, especially with like BI tools, there's so many out there that, to all intents and purposes, look the same. It's often down to what the corporate choice has been.
Yeah.
They are all quite different. I think they all have pros and cons, and they've all got a place. But usually for the let's call them report consumers or analytic consumers, they just want it to look nice and tell a story.
Hmm.
and I sort of can understand that because they're presented with lots of information and content and graphs and all the rest of it all the time. So if you
Yeah.
put a dashboard in front of me, I need to be able to understand it in 30 seconds, sort of thing.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
exactly.
I think there'd be a lot of some of the people we've got lined up, and I'm desperately trying not to drop names yet, but some of them I know have had different experiences with different tools. Some quite nowadays people would say are quite archaic um, and not necessarily moved. The world moved on, but again, these big enterprises make these choices for usually very valid reasons because of the
Hmm.
existing tech stack that's there that they've got to plug in or whatever. So it'd be really interesting to talk to the people on the ground as to that decision was made for you. How did you get on with actually using it in anger? So that'd be quite cool.
Yeah.
And I think just picking up on your point around the skills bit in the data scientist role, I think for me there's an interesting I think bow wave of skills and team structures and interactions that for me go a bit broader than, and it probably links to how people are naming themselves data scientists, but it's how you build a data team and
Hmm.
sort of titles aside, what does a good makeup look like? And I'm not going to say too much about how we do it in Oakland, but we've had to, it's a 35-year-old business that we're now sort of operating almost like a startup. We've had to rethink and reinvent the way we work as a company.
Yeah.
Um, and we've had to learn that as we go, and we're still learning now. We're not a tech company by our history. We're a management consultancy by our history, and it's very, very different. I've worked in tech companies before, so sort of get it, but I'd love to hear how other people are going about building data teams.
Hmm.
Or how does your data scientist or your data engineer or your data developer or pick a title, but how does that fit into that mix?
Yeah.
I'd love to see how other people are doing that because I think it's one of those that I believe there's no single answer or right or wrong answer. It's often down to multiple factors. But one of the things I've been observing, even with our own team, is the titles are becoming less important. It's the skill set of what you can cover through the stack.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and when I talked before about purist data scientists, but I think this is less true now. But when we started, the people we'd get if we asked for that would tend to be like modelers,
Hmm.
so the people doing like machine learning, but only doing that. And back to your point, they were often dealing with nice, perfect, clean data sets because they came from like an academic background. And so you put them into some of the projects we're doing, and it's like, well, no, there's 10 billion rows of data. It's a complete mess. Go figure it out. And that's a lot harder to solve and figure out if you've never been taught that bit and you're going to be building models on top of the data set. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear how other people are solving that through the mix of skills and also the sort of mix of experiences and mix of seniority as well.
Hmm.
That plays into team design, team makeup in terms of who does what, how you do it, how you structure what you do, and I think that is changing. And my slight fear, picking up on what you said before, is if I could walk out onto the street and throw a stone and probably hit a data scientist these days. Um, and so how do you distinguish between good data people, let's
Hmm.
call it that instead, and less good data people. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think, yeah, as I said, I knew I shouldn't have asked you the question first because my answer now just matches your answer. But I'm sure there's other things that we will pick up along the way, and with the sort of guests, they are from very different backgrounds and skill sets and industries, and we should get quite I think, a good breadth and a good mix of opinion, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for people who are not afraid of sharing their opinion, talking, as we both said, the sort of warts and all story.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely.
I guess just to wrap up, is there, as an appeal to hopefully we will get avid listeners as we get this started. If you could reach out and say, yeah, I'd love to, if somebody could contact me from this area or this industry to come and speak, is there anybody that obviously we know who we've got, but that we haven't got lined up yet that you would love to raise their hand and go, yeah, I'll come and speak to you?
I think it's definitely someone from Monzo. I've been an avid
Cool.
follower of Monzo, and a user or a customer from when they were dishing out alpha cards in a meetup in Manchester. So
Cool.
really interested, and it kind of links back to what I was saying earlier around startups and kind of greenfield implementations.
Yeah.
And having worked for a bank before, a big legacy bank, it'd be interesting to see the difference in how they do things and how they set up their technology, but also, as you've kind of just covered off, their structure and their people and how they do things.
Yes.
How about you, Andy?
Probably similar in the startup space, actually, and less on the tech, more, I guess, from a sort of, well, as you introduced this, data leader perspective. Not necessarily from a particular industry, because I think for me, they all have really different rationale and experiences. But somebody that's gone through the process of creating a data team, whether that be an internal team, like you're in the process of doing, or a consultancy or a tech startup, but the journey they've been through to get to where they are now, and it comes a bit back to your sort of opening statement around why we want to do this and why we want to do it differently. It's hearing that journey and the bumps along that journey of what people have gone through to get to where they are. And that's not just we tried this technology. I'm sure lots of people have faced adversity in many different ways when they've started up a business. But certainly in the data space, it's just such a fascinating space for me in terms of all the moving parts, all the different, I guess, lenses that you look at it through. So I know
Mm-hmm.
people that have worked with people that, well, they care about tech. Their position on the data world is very much about data strategy or data governance or data quality or data warehousing or whatever it might be. I think when you have to start up a team, you're having to consider and look at all of that, and then as a leader,
Yeah.
think about where you're trying to get to. So, I'd love to hear from somebody that's been there and done it. I think if it's from an area that is particularly sort of thought leading on the technical side, that would be even more interesting. And that, again, there's many industries out there that probably fit that bill. I'm always looking also for people that have got a slightly obscure data story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
So again, coming back to what we tend to see out there, is things like the use of dashboards or the use of the output to drive a business process, or I don't know, the latest use of tech for ASOS to be able to provide you an online version of yourself to choose which colour t-shirt to buy or whatever it might be. I'm always intrigued as to the slightly off-center stories of how a company you wouldn't, or an organization you wouldn't necessarily think of using data in that way, have done so and driven some change or some benefit. Because I think
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I think people think differently about stuff, rather than just reverting to the world the world you understand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always really interesting because I often come away from those sort of conversations with an absolute ton of ideas, most of which will never see the light of day. But just gets the grey cells going, I think. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so cool. So this is our first episode, as you said. We've got many more to come. We've got guests lined up already, and we're hoping to get these out pretty regularly, and for people to enjoy and for people to come and interact with. So if people out there listening to this want to get involved or have got ideas for guests or suggestions for guests that they'd like us to try and tap up, feel free to drop us a note or drop comments into the episodes, and we will do our best.
Cool. Okay. So thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll speak to you next time.
Cheers all.